I'm going to start today with an overview of Kansas City's fiscal year 25-26 submitted budget. So you can see the highlights and changes from last budget year. And then, of course, we have our full budget document available online at www.kcmo.gov/budget. So our budget document is 750 some pages of everything you might want to know about Kansas City's budget, I hope. So the budget is broken down in several categories. The first is the transmittal letter, and that is a letter prepared by the mayor and the city manager that highlights major changes in Kansas City's budget and priorities in funding in this submitted budget. I'll highlight a couple other areas here if you just want to focus on, if you have time to read 20 pages in that book. I would suggest that you look at the transmittal letter and the budget overview. The budget overview shows major highlights and changes. There's also views at the department level, at the service level in the program activity pages. Kansas City passes a capital plan, a 5-year capital plan, and that's contained in this budget document. So residents not only know what we're funding this year, but also for the next 4 years for capital improvements with your taxpayer dollars. And then the budget also provides various fund schedules, so you can take a deeper dive and look at Kansas City's budget in various ways. Next slide. So Kansas City's budget is broken down by council priorities. And this is outlined every time a council comes into office. We go through public engagement sessions. And I would encourage you ahead, when there's a new council, to watch for these meetings. Because what that does is it sets the goals and priorities for Kansas City over the next 4 years. So this budget is broken down, and you see what our council priorities are. This is part of the past citywide business plan outlining this council and funding goals for the next 4 years for Kansas City. The citywide business plan is included in the adopted budget, so you can learn more there. Next slide. So Kansas City's submitted budget is a $2.5 billion budget. Our budget is broken down in 2 categories, and these are just basic accounting for government finance standards. The first is considered governmental activities funds at $1.7 million. The second is business type activity funds. Business type activity is our water and aviation department for the city. They're fee supported, and only those fees can be used to support that budget. A little bit about how Kansas City's budget is broken down. This is Kansas City's budget as a whole. These are the revenues for the city. Kansas City's budget is broken out by, we call a third, a third, a third. A third in red are business type activities in Kansas City's budget. That's our water and our aviation departments. They are fee supported. Those revenues can only support those operations within the city. The next category is special revenue, debt funds, and capital funds, representing another third of Kansas City's budget. This third of Kansas City's budget is restricted by what voters and legislation say we can use that money for. So I'll give an example of park sales tax approved by voters. That's a special revenue fund for the city. When voters of Kansas City approved a park sales tax, that money can only be used to support the operations of the Kansas City park system. The other third of Kansas City's budget is the general fund, and that is our least restricted by use, but it also supports some of the most important citizen priorities in Kansas City's budget, and we'll talk more about the general fund ahead. So we just talked a little bit about where the money comes from. This view shows you how the money is spent by council goal. So on the right, we have business activities, and that's considered infrastructure and accessibility. That's our water and aviation department. those funds can only be used to support those operations. On the left is the special revenue funds, the debt funds, the capital funds we talked about, as well as the general fund. You will see here for the governmental activities, 41.6% of Kansas City's budget is spent on public safety. You'll see housing and healthy communities represents 19%. Infrastructure and accessibility at 20.6%. Inclusive growth and development is 9.8% of Kansas City's budget, and finance and governance is 9% of Kansas City's budget. So this next slide illustrates what that means in dollars. And you'll see here our adopted budget in our current fiscal year and what is being submitted in the fiscal year 25-26 budget. And you'll see a difference column of what's changing. So you can see here, the largest change in the submitted budget is in the finance and governance section, and we'll talk more about that ahead. We have some one-time investments needed for the city, like building improvements and some technology infrastructure for the city, really driving that increase. Our next area of highest increases is public safety, increasing $71.9 million or 11.7%. And we'll talk more ahead. I have a specific slide to talk about each of these goals and major highlights about these changes. So here's a view of Kansas City's budget by department. This is governmental activities. So this is excluding our aviation and water department, but it shows how dollars are being spent not only at the goal level, but at the department level. So the largest funding for Kansas City is, of course, we talked about public safety. Our police department is funded at $343 million, and followed by our fire department funded at $321.5 million. I won't go through each of these categories, but this illustrates really, and this is also broken out in the budget overview online, how Kansas City is allocating within its departments and goals for the 26 submitted budget. So I want to talk specifically about the general fund for Kansas City because this is the least restricted by use of funds for Kansas City. So oftentimes when new service requests for the city are being considered, this is often where we're looking because we have to use aviation funds for aviation. We have to use park sales tax for parks programs. So here is a breakdown of the general fund for Kansas City, our least restrictive funds. And this shows you where the money comes from in the general fund. The majority of funding is supported by our earnings tax in Kansas City at 44%. And then you'll see here a breakdown of the other types going in there. Most notably, the next in category is utility taxes at 13% and local use tax for online sales at 13%. I won't go through each of these, but this just illustrates where the money is coming from. So the next slide talks specifically about how we're spending money of the general fund. This is our least restrictive of the funds, and you'll see here 72% of Kansas City's general fund is spent on public safety. That is the fire department, that is the police department, and the municipal court for Kansas City. Other categories here include our finance and governance goal at 13.3%. Those are our main central departments for the city supporting operations like the finance department that I'm from, the law department, general services. You'll also see housing and healthy communities at 12.1%. Some of the largest areas of growth in recent years has been in public safety and housing and healthy communities. And this budget makes considerable investment there too, and we'll talk ahead about that. So one of the challenges, and you heard the Mayor Pro Tem Park Shaw speak specifically about priority-based budgeting, and why this is so important for Kansas City is this slide right here. The submitted budget for Kansas City for fiscal year 26 for the general fund, expenditures are exceeding revenue by $64.5 million. And this is an issue that we have to face ahead as residents, but also the very tough job these elected officials have. Because what we're delivering for Kansas City is basic quality of life services, and there isn't enough money to do everything. So some tough decisions will have to be made ahead. So what I'd like to show you here is the top blue line is our ceiling and our floor. So Kansas City and our policymakers have prioritized an emergency reserve, a fund balance reserve for Kansas City. Just like if you're balancing your checkbook at home, we can't get in a position in a city that we don't have an emergency reserve. In the event of COVID or a pandemic, residents still need services delivered. So this council has passed a policy that we have a 3-month emergency reserve, 3 months of expenditures every year. Our emergency floor is 2 months. That's the red line in this chart. We are very fortunate to be in a position right now to be above the above our target reserve. But this budget will draw down, passed as is without any amendment, $64.6 million. And this is a conversation that this city council will be having ahead in next budget year. But what I think they have so smartly done is built the framework around this concept of priority-based budgeting. And what priority-based budgeting in the past, when we had faced a situation like this, what that meant was every department got the same cut across the board. Every department got 11% cut, 5% cut. And what that means is we have very inefficient and it's not strategic approach to resource allocation. So what priority-based budgeting is doing is building the framework for how does each and every service align to meet resident priorities? How does each and every program serve our population served? And that is the framework being built this year to be able to support strategic decisions, because this is a tough choice ahead, not only in this budget for any additions, but also in future budgets for Kansas City. Without any change, by next fiscal year, we will be in a position for Kansas City that we are below our target reserve. And that is not a position that we want to be as a city, because we want to be able to continue to deliver services ahead. This slide just illustrates the general fund balance. The red is our structural imbalance for the general fund. So this budget that's presented has a structural imbalance, but I do think the City Council is building the strategic framework for those choices ahead on how we can continue to deliver priority services for residents. So I'll talk through a few highlights in Kansas City's budget. This is not all encompassing. It is a $2.5 billion budget, but these slides are meant to talk about major changes at the council goal level. So starting with housing and healthy communities, this budget increases the dangerous building demolition by $1.7 million for total funding there of $5.2 million. I hope you'll see there is a focus on clean, safe neighborhoods in this budget. This has been a priority of the city manager and city council, and I think you'll see some great progress in funding here to correspond with that. The second is that this budget adds $1.4 million for illegal dumping enforcement. So that's a significant increase. That will achieve funding levels of $2.4 million. So we are significantly increasing that budget. This budget includes $8 million dedicated to violence prevention and intervention. That has been a priority of this city council, not just to focus on the enforcement side, but what are we doing for prevention and intervention? This budget funds the full implementation of trash and recycling carts that have been rolled out throughout the city, and it maintains the expanded bulky item operations, supporting a cleaner Kansas City. This budget adds a dedicated team in the Parks Department for the maintenance of Brush Creek. And this budget extends the Rebuild KC program with $300,000 of funding for neighborhood grants. The Rebuild KC program was started during the American Rescue Plan with federal dollars, and it has been, I think, instrumental in support of neighborhood initiatives. So this budget continues that program with general fund dollars. This budget is year 3 of 3 for a $1 million annual investment to plant 10,000 trees during this 3-year period. Also, this budget focuses on housing security and supporting those experiencing homelessness. This budget is year 3 of 4 of an annual $12.5 million investment for a total funding over 4 years of $50 million in the Housing Trust Fund for Affordable Housing Initiatives. This budget maintains $2.6 million for the Right to Counsel program that has supported so many individuals and families facing eviction. This budget adds $1 million in emergency rental assistance. This is something that the city was previously supported by grant dollars. Those grant dollars have ended with the American Rescue Plan, but understanding the urgent need in this community, this budget funds that from the general fund. This budget expands emergency shelter for those experiencing homelessness beyond extreme winter weather with the addition of $1 million. This budget dedicates $750,000 for homeless encampment cleanup. And those, while that program has been operating, it's been taking from critical operations supporting other services in the city. So we're dedicating a line item there for the important work. This budget continues to maintain $1.1 million for small business support. In the area of public safety, I mentioned before, this public safety is the largest expense in the governmental activities budget at $688.3 million. Public safety accounts for 72% of the general fund and 41% of the governmental activities budget. This budget prioritizes increases in wages and benefits for our fire department and our police department public safety officers so we can make sure we can recruit and retain quality public safety officers. And this budget also adds $1 million in support to enhance security for entertainment districts in the city. In the area of infrastructure and accessibility, this budget continues to fund sidewalks and ADA improvements for sidewalks with $7.5 million of annual funding from the GEO bond approved by voters in 2017. This budget also dedicates $14.6 million in sidewalks focused around elementary schools. This budget adds $3 million for Vision Zero. Vision Zero is the city's program for safer streets, for our high traffic and for our pedestrians to ensure that we do have safe streets, for the highest funding level ever in this initiative at $8 million. This budget provides $34 million for the neighborhood preservation projects through its PIAC program. If you don't know about PIAC, you can go to kcmo.org/budget. PIAC is a resident-driven priority for improvements you need in your streets, curbs, parks, and public facilities. This budget adds $3 million for the city's continued streetlight conversion and maintains the enhanced snow removal operations started several years ago with this city manager. In the area of inclusive growth and development, this budget adds $500,000 for contract management and additional advocacy in the Civil Rights and Equal Opportunity Office. This budget adds $2.5 million for maintenance and event support of the convention facilities. And it reorganizes our city planning and development department, promoting efficiencies while continuing development activities at a productive pace, and finalizes preparations as Kansas City prepares to host the 2026 World Cup, anticipated to bring 650,000 visitors to Kansas City over 2 months. And then finally, last but not least here, finance and governance for Kansas City. I talked about some one-time investments. This budget adds $10.2 million for a one-time investment for the city's enterprise resource planning software. That is basically the backbone of the technology supporting all of our city departments for HR, for finance operations, for procurement throughout the city. This budget's adding $10.8 million for facility improvements. It continues replacement of city fleet that's at its end of its useful life to include our snow removal and trash trucks, and then adds $500,000 for wayfinding signage to improve accessibility and mobility across the city. I can't cover every detail in Kansas City's $2.5 billion budget, but those are the major changes. There will be two other opportunities, as our finance chair spoke, for public budget hearings to provide your input. The second will be held Monday, February 24th at 6 p.m. at Woodneath Library. The third is on Saturday, March 1st at 9 a.m. and this is located, it will be at Avila University in the Goppert Theater. There's also an opportunity for those you might want to add input after today if you don't want to speak, or those that cannot be here today. If you go to Budget's website, there is a link for Speak Easy, where you can provide electronically your feedback on Kansas City's budget. And every week we have a shared location to provide elected officials your direct input on Kansas City's budget.